Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Salon Series here at the San Diego School of Creative and Performing Arts. My name is Richard Trujillo. I'm the artistic director here at the school, and tonight we have an awesome guest, somebody who I have been following from my days dating way back when in Arizona, and following his career and his career pathway for the last couple of decades. He's an outstanding writer, an outstanding artist, and an amazing journalist as well. So we're lucky to have him on the show this evening. And before I introduce this remarkable guest, I just want to thank the Friends of SCPA for all of their support for the Salon Series. The Salon Series does come at a little bit of a cost, and without the Friends of SCPA, we could not produce the series at all. We're very, very grateful to the Friends of SCPA. If you have missed any of our episodes, please check us out at sdscpamainstage.com. Click on the Salon Series, and you can go to the archive list down at the bottom of the page. Tonight's guest, ladies and gentlemen, is an author and a journalist, and boy, has he had a colorful career and journey in the arts, and that's why he's here tonight, is to share with us a little bit of that journey. May I present our guest this evening, Mr. Jon Talton. Jon.
Richard, it's great to be with you.
Jon, I think the one thing that that I learned from the time that we had a chance to ideate last fall were some pieces that I did not know about you. I've always known you as a journalist and writer, and actually my first introduction to you was as a writer. You had just come out with a novel that you had been writing in Arizona, and it was kind of all over the place. Then I started to learn about you as a journalist in the Arizona Republic. But after talking with you last fall, my gosh, your journey has not been linear, to say the least. You have had you've had a pretty remarkable journey as an artist, and I think I would love for you to just kind of share with us a little bit of what that was like, the young Jon Talton growing up, the stories that you have to tell, and what your initial passions were.
Well, my initial passions were girls, but being unable to get a date, I'll try to make it as linear as possible. I was very fortunate to go to a high school that had an outstanding performing arts and visual arts program. It was Coronado High School in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I was in the theater, both acting and backstage. And then I was in the choirs and sang in church choirs. And so in addition to that, did musical theater, went on and studied theater and history at Arizona State University. And then I took a teaching job at a small college in Oklahoma called Southeastern Oklahoma State University, where I was an instructor in theater, and I was part of Molly Risso's group that founded the Oklahoma Shakespeare Festival, which is still going some 40 years later.
Yeah.
I always wrote, but I never expected to be a journalist. But the pay was so terrible for an instructor in theater at Southeastern Oklahoma State University that I went down to the little newspaper, the Durant Daily Democrat, and they had an opening for a reporter. And the crusty old editor, and were there any other time back in those days, just looked up at me and he said, "Can you spell?" And I said, "Yes, I can." And from that point on, I was in newspapers. I came to San Diego to a small daily up in Oceanside called the Blade Tribune, which was a legendary paper for its investigative reporting. I lived down in OB and would commute. And then I got to large dailies, the Dayton Daily News, the Cincinnati Enquirer, the Rocky Mountain News, Charlotte Observer,
Arizona Republic, and
now I'm at the Seattle Times. And around 1995, I had been gone from Arizona for many years, and I wrote what I realize now was kind of
a love letter home, was a
mystery novel called Concrete Desert. And it took about 5 years to get it published from St. Martin. And since then, I've written 9 books in that series. I've written 2 novels in another series.
I've written a thriller.
And then I have a new novel coming out. And I've written 1 nonfiction book. And I also went back to graduate school at Miami of Ohio to get my PhD in history because I was going to get out of journalism because there was going to be this vast series of openings for history professors everywhere. And that none of that turned out to be true. Had I followed that path all the way, I would be at a community college in El Paso. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's not like I would have been teaching at UC San Diego or something. My protagonist in the Napstone Mysteries actually spent time in San Diego, and his first wife lives there. So there's a San Diego connection. So that's the elevator speech of my creative career. The one thing I will add is that I couldn't do everything. I had to give something up. My mother, who was a concert pianist, told me, you can't do everything. You finally have to focus. And I finally focused on my writing, and I don't regret leaving the theater. It was wonderful, but I'd done everything I wanted to do. I miss my music, and I'll never stop missing.
That is remarkable, and it's just absolutely remarkable to me that you really did go through a real journey. A lot of people start out, like, let's say, in the theater, would have become a part of some founding of Oklahoma Shakespeare Festival. I mean, that's rather huge and significant, and stuck to it, right? A lot of folks are already committed to something, and you seem to just be open to not just where the wind took you, where the passion and the possibility seem to exist for you. Would that be a fair statement?
I think that's completely fair. And the other thing that I would add to that is that, I spent 17 years as a business editor at
major metropolitan dailies.
So I was a news manager, department head over multiple employees with heavy responsibilities that not only involved gathering and reporting and editing the news, but overseeing a budget and supervising people and all those fun things. Everything that I brought to the table, I had originally learned in the theater and in music, the discipline. And as a stage manager, the road not taken was that I had a chance to go to Corning, New York for summer stock. And when I was in high school, and I wasn't able to do that. Had I done that, I might have become a Broadway stage manager. You'll never know. But I always tried to have every door that opened, I took it. The Phoenix Symphony would bring in opera companies like from Seattle or Houston. There was in the Arizona Opera
then, and
they would do grand opera
like Tosca
and Aida and Carmen, and they would call for supers, supernumerary, spirit carriers, and priests to march in these grand pageants in the opera. And at my high school, several of us would do it every year, one or two operas. Why? Because it was there. And I just never wanted to say no.
That's awesome. That is awesome. As I'm listening to you also, I'm thinking about so many transitions, where you're moving from place to place. And the one transition that sort of really fascinates me these days is the transition in what we read and what we see from journalists. Journalism means something today that was very, very different 25 years ago. And what have you seen? Because you've now seen it from multiple angles throughout your entire career. What have you seen as like one of the major or several of the major differences in journalism?
Well, the biggest thing is the newspapers are dying. And as newspapers are dying, democracy is dying. People don't know what's happening in their hometown. The Columbia Journalism Review maps what they call news deserts, which are counties and entire parts of states that have lost daily and even weekly newspapers. Every newspaper, whether it's the San Diego Union Tribune or the Seattle Times, is fighting for its life. And so we've had enormous cutbacks. Tens of thousands of excellent journalists can't find jobs. And the old business model that allowed us to basically give the news away for 25 cents or 50 cents a day broke down. And nobody's found a real way to make it work. There's a lot of experimentation going on, including here in Seattle, but nobody's really found a way to put it back together again. So we don't have the bandwidth, as they would say, to do the work that we used to do, to cover the places we used to cover. I used to work at major metros that had Washington bureaus. You hardly ever find that anymore. You oftentimes don't find a state capitol bureau. And so there's just so much going on that people don't know because the newspapers aren't able to cover it. And not everybody can be a journalist. It's a very specialized craft and calling. And social media not in any way can take its place.
That's a fascinating point. I want to go down this rabbit hole just for a second. I find it rather shallow when I hear so many folks blame the media for so many things. And my perspective is that we have choices that we can make. If you're not particularly fond of a particular writer or media outlet, you can change it or find somebody else. But more importantly, it feels as though journalism has been reduced to a number of words per any article or any column that now comes out. And it also feels like you have your hyperbolic folks or your show people, and then you have your real journalists who are simply just trying to cover the news. How has that impacted you as a journalist? And I'm just touching the surface of it. I'm sure that there's a lot that resonates. How does that impact you?
The points you made are very valid. I would say that there are some things that you can blame the media for not covering things adequately, the Trump presidency being one of them. his uh, problems and potential criminal issues and lies
were not given enough
coverage ahead of the election. So there's that, and then there is what are the media? I don't like to consider myself part of the media. I'm part of the working press, and the entertainment that people see on television, that may be the media, but it's largely entertainment too. And then there's the risk of saying that we're only going to publish the things that get the most clicks online. And that is happening. It's not happening, thank goodness, where I work. But that our part of our mission is to tell people the things they don't want to know and don't want to hear. And when the news is based solely
on
the clicks or the audience size on Prince
Harry and
Meghan Markle, when we have the planet in
trouble with climate change,
that's wrong, and that's media malpractice.
Wow. Yeah, that's a powerful statement too. And yeah, I do find us spending a lot of inordinate amount of time on things that just seem so silly and superfluous versus things that are probing. I want to ask you so that our students can understand a little bit as well. When you are studying writing and you're looking at writing as a career pathway, what is the difference between the practice and the discipline of being a journalist versus that discipline and practice of being what some people might call a creative writer?
There's a great Hemingway quote that I will mangle, but remember Ernest Hemingway wrote for the Kansas
City Star and
did other journalism as well as being a great novelist. And Hemingway said something
like,
journalism will help a young writer up to a certain point, and then after that it will ruin him. Back in the days of him as a pronoun, so we'll say him or her or them. And I think that's fair. So as a journalist, I learned to make deadlines, to write to length, to avoid unnecessary words, as Strunk and White
would say.
All of the dozens and hundreds of disciplines that come with becoming a writer,
with
learning how to write clear sentences and that sort of thing. But as a fiction writer, you do different things. You imagine characters, you set up scenes, you create tension. There's some crossover. A good news story has stakes. A good short story and a good novel have stakes. And you have to be able to set those up and reveal them to the reader. But the two are different. The one can inform the other. But if one is talented and fortunate enough to start on creative writing and really stick to it and get into a prestigious program like the Iowa Writers Workshop, then you're on your way. And then please send me your agent's name and number and a thank you note so that I can get ahead.
I love that. The Iowa Writers Workshop. So that's new information for me. So, our families and students that are listening, you may want to go and Google that, do a little research on that. That sounds like a fairly significant writing organization and opportunity that's out there.
And there are good ones other places too, usually out of universities, and it it won't take away from the fact that you have to go to work every morning as a writer and sit there by yourself and work and grind out your 1,000 words a day or whatever your mission is, and then rewrite. Writing is rewriting. You have to go back, clean it up, see what's wrong, see what's not fitting where it should. It is a true discipline. It's not just fooling around.
Yeah, when I think of great writers, each writer has a unique voice when reading, and you can see it in the language, you can see it in the rhythm of the language, what oftentimes in theater we would call the music, right? The real music. I think just for a second before we get to our next question, I just want to ask you, when you started to develop your own voice as a writer, who were some of the writers that you had looked at whose voices you like, this really resonates with me, and I'd kind of like to take pieces of it and develop it into my own voice?
Well, there's the old saying that says something like mediocre writers borrow and
great writers steal.
And then
yeah.
But the meaning is that not plagiarize, but they then make it their own. And so I've learned from every writer that I have ever read, whether it's Hemingway and Fitzgerald or Eudora Welty or whomever. There is no one writer that I wanted to be, but there's an asterisk there. And before I tell the asterisk, I'll just say
you have to read widely,
and you have to read all sorts of writers, and you have to keep reading, and you'll start to find your voice. And the asterisk is that in the David Mapstone mysteries, I was very influenced by Raymond Chandler, and I wrote the first one, Concrete Desert, as kind of an homage to Raymond Chandler. And the way Chandler made Los Angeles into a character, I've tried to make Phoenix, believe it or not. I know you hate zonies when you live in San Diego. when I lived in San Diego, I
was always, as people would say,
where are you from? I'd say
Denver.
That's funny.
But I tried to make and in the Mapstone
mysteries,
the latest one came out last year, the Bomb Shelter. I've tried to make Phoenix into its own character,
and believe it or not, Phoenix has a lot of
character and history. And maybe there's a detective in San Diego. I'm not aware of one. It's tough in some cities to set detective novels, and I don't know why that is.
Yeah, it almost feels like if the noir isn't there, you create it. If that makes any sense at all. To me, it does. But
no, yeah, I mean, you make good sense, but
you've also got to have an audience. So
my second series
is called the Cincinnati Case Books,
and Cincinnati is a fascinating
city.
And it's beautiful, and it's got a lot of old buildings and old neighborhoods and a lot of tension
and racial
troubles, and yet the books don't sell. I don't know why that is.
Wow,
there's
that's
too much
interesting.
of a
tendency in publishing to say the book has to be set in New York or LA or Miami.
Right.
And I think that's a terrible blind spot in publishing, but it's a reality. And I've done okay with the books set in Phoenix, but they probably would have done better
Had I set them in LA
or New York.
You know, that's fascinating. One of the shows that I used to watch 20 years ago when I was younger, and I would watch usually late night television, and I would watch Frasier, set in
Yeah.
Seattle. I've recently reacquainted myself with it, and I'm fascinated from episode to episode because now I'm looking at it going, wait a minute, is that okay? So that's Seattle, according to Frasier, 20 some odd years ago, and I was just in Seattle. Interesting lens for that television show of Seattle. It's hard to sort of now just willingly accept it and wrap my head around it. And especially, and that I'm getting to a point here, especially in light of currency. When I've read you've written several articles surrounding the social justice issues that have been happening in Seattle. And Seattle has had its own sort of Portlandia style, um, occurrences, right? What has that been like in a place like Seattle that would seemingly be, more of a sleepy coastal city, but really isn't?
That's like me saying to you, well, all you guys have down
there is the Navy and tourism. And
of course, and that was true when I
lived there, and they actually had the nukes in bunkers on the road
rode down to the Cabrillo National Monument. Don't tell anybody. But I'm sure that the naval intelligence is now on their way to come get me, but it was not a secret. We knew.
Yeah.
But the Seattle is a superstar city, and it has always been about it's been a business city. Before it was the Emerald City,
it was the Queen City of the Northwest.
It surpassed Portland long ago
as a business
center. So two of the 5 big tech companies are
headquartered in or near Seattle.
It's an incredibly rich city. It is a huge business center with world connections, and it has the most diverse metropolitan economy. Everything from tech to maritime to startups to biotech and biomedical and on that I have ever covered. But it's also a left-leaning city that used to be a kind of a pragmatic liberal city. And I
say that up until the middle of the
2010s. It now has a lot more of kind of a far left woke faction to it. It's a big university city with
the University of Washington,
and people have been shut up with nothing
to do.
And I'm not trivializing this,
but to go out
and protest. And now in Portland's a whole other planet, even though it is a big city. But in Seattle, we're trying to get our arms around how to walk and chew gum. Social justice and a vibrant economy are not only work hand in hand, but you can't have one without the other. Just in the simplest level, you won't have the tax revenue.
Right. And so So the issues that you've been witnessing, is there a counter to a lot of the protests that you've been covering? Is there an opposition to what you described as, this very woke left wing?
Um, there is, but it's not well organized. Whereas the far left here is very organized, with lots of activists that can be mobilized to come to a city council meeting and shout everybody down. It's very illiberal. And so the superstar cities are going to lead us out of this pandemic. Whether Seattle continues to be a superstar city is sadly open to question. I hope it's so, because there are just too many assets here at risk. And there will not be the tax dollars to do the things that the wokesters want done if they drive business out. But we're going to find out what happens. If you and I were having this conversation before March of 2020, we would be talking about how amazingly robust and fantastic and wonderful Seattle is.
Yeah, we were just there, a few years back for the Art Schools Network National Conference, and it had been a while since I'd been there. I was there as a kid, and I was blown away at the growth of the city.
Yeah. Well, downtown.
Right.
You're talking about a city of 85 square miles. Phoenix is 550 square miles, and they got nothing to show for it. And
right.
so, you have this magnificent skyline. We've been the crane capital of America for most of the 2010s, and we've still got buildings going up. I mean, the new skyscraper just was completed across the street from me, a block away. One is going up. It's still happening.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, Seattle seems like such a great place, and I've heard this for years, right? I've heard this for years because of the music scene there, because of the once really thriving and vibrant theater scene that was happening in Seattle at one time. Just seems like a great place for artists. And it would seem to me that what a great place to practice your discipline, to get up every single morning and to sit down and say, my focus is going to be on writing, or my focus is going to be on being a creative. Would that still be fair to say about Seattle and the energy that's there?
I think it is. I think it's going to. We're going to have to see how we come out of the pandemic, because it's wounded all of these organizations, be it the Seattle Symphony, the Art Museum, the Paramount Theater, the independent theater companies here. They've all been wounded, but this has happened across the country. But yeah, this is a great place for creative people. And there are, it doesn't rain here nearly as much as people think. It rains more in Cincinnati and Charlotte than it rains in Seattle. It mists a lot. We very rarely get a big downpour. Today was a nice sunny day. And it's not very cold here. It's actually rather temperate. Now it gets cool, and we get a few cold days, and but that's going to change with climate change. But Seattleites don't really want you to come, and so they'll tell you that it rains all the time and it's cold as hell.
Yeah, stay away.
Whereas with San Diego, where I was, it was like the weather was so boring. It was like the high today is 66 and the low tonight is 62. And every day
Yeah, I think there's some lore with Seattle. Yeah, you do get that perspective of it's dark, it's overcast, there's a high rate of suicide, so there's a darkness to it. You have to want to be in that kind of space. The smell of coffee, the fact that there's a coffee house on every corner, right? Um, and what a
Only a block
perfect.
away from me. It's not on my corner. I wish it were, but it's a block away.
So
Do you know what the suicide?
Capital of America was the last I looked.
no.
It's Tucson, Arizona.
Oh my
Interestingly
gosh.
enough, and also Las Vegas. Um, Here's the thing about Seattle. It is the farthest north major metropolitan
Area in America, farther north.
north than Boston. And so you have these, for most people, glorious summers. I'm a Phoenician, so nothing makes
Me more depressed than endless sunny days. But in Seattle, we have these glorious summers where the sun is up until 9:30 at night and there's not a cloud in the sky.
but you pay for that in the wintertime where
The sun
sun will go down at 4:30 and you'll have the big dark for a few months. It doesn't bother me. I like it. I like the night time.
Yeah.
I love the boogie. But that is a different thing about Seattle,
just
geographically and meteorologically,
that
not everybody can handle. I mean, the people have seasonal adjusted
disorder.
I have reverse seasonal adjusted disorder, where sunny days
Days make me depressed.
Oh, that's interesting. You know what? I kind of like I'm on your wavelength there, big time. I like a little drizzly and cool and overcast. I love that.
you know,
Listen, I thank you for humoring me in reminiscing about Seattle. Seattle happens to be one of my favorite cities in the United States. It just is.
well, thank you. We're still here.
And I say that too because we've got so many students at Cornish College of the Arts. And I just want families to know that what an incredible city it is, just how welcoming the city is, and how vibrant, at least prior to the shutdown, how vibrant the city is. And Cornish College of the Arts, University of Washington, we've got several kids who were just accepted for next fall at UW. So
the best in the country.
yeah, just really great institutions in a really great metropolitan area. And somewhat walkable. I mean, for major cities.
It's totally walkable. I haven't owned a car in 10 years.
And haven't missed it.
I mean, I'm on the main bus route, and I'm a block and a half away from the light rail
Station.
Oh, that's perfect.
so I can get from my place downtown to the UW campus in 9 minutes.
Oh
on
my
light
gosh.
rail.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah,
That's
it's
awesome.
amazing.
So, parents that are listening out there, if your kid is interested in Cornish College of the Arts, University of Washington, there's some those are great institutions and a great city to be in. Jon, I do want to transition to one thing that I think is really critical, and that is we talked briefly about the discipline of being the writer. And definitely, I took my cue from Hemingway as well. In reading his The Movable Feast, it became quite evident and clear in his journey that it was important for a writer to have a place to go, whether that's someplace different in the home, or whether that's an office that you create, or wherever it is, that you have someplace to go every single day, and you go to work. You go to work and you sit down, as you were saying, and you work on whatever it is that your daily goal is. If it's 1,000 words a day, if it's 10 pages a day, whatever the goal is. For the writer, can you talk to us a little bit about your process as a writer? What is the day of Jon Talton look like?
Well, let me just throw in a couple of things. I highly recommend
Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way.
But you have to do the exercise. Now, there's some new agey stuff, and
she was the ex-wife of a famous Hollywood director, so got a great divorce settlement and could move to Taos and think great thoughts. But her
book, The Artist's Way, is
a really good one, and
you should do that. But you got to do the exercise. You can't just read the book. And the other one is Stephen King's
book, which I think is called On Writing.
But it is the best, and not very long. It's very approachable,
but it's the
best book for a young writer that I can think of. Morning people rule the world, and I am not one of them. So I do not get up first thing and start writing at 6 a.m. I've got my day job as a columnist at the Seattle Times, and so typically I have to make a column deadline for part of the week. But then there are other times where generally by
about 10:30 I'm at the desk working,
and then I might work until noon, have lunch with my wife Susan, and then get back to work and work through the afternoon. But I never really turn it off because I can write down in notebooks or on the Microsoft Notes on
my
iPhone or whatever device you have. Typically, it'll be walking down a street or in an elevator or in the shower
or whatever, and an idea
will come to me, and as quickly as I can, I want to write that down so that I can then
flesh it out.
In a very real way, we never close. And so that's the way it is for me.
That's powerful. We've got some folks that are watching tonight, and I'm so honored that one of our journalist teacher is watching tonight, Lindsay Ten. Lindsay, first of all, thank you for tuning in, and thank you to Aaron Carlos Gonzalez, who's out there as well. They've got some questions for you. Lindsay, first of all, she wanted to say that she's going to share that quote about what people need but don't want to hear. She's definitely going to use that quote. But Lindsay's got a great question. How do you choose? We're jumping back and forth here a little bit between the artist as writer and the artist as journalist. But this is great. How do you choose which news stories to write? Do you have much freedom of choice?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that Lindsay is the name of one of the protagonists
in my David Mapstone mystery. So there's a shameless
promo there. As a columnist, what my job is writing opinion that's informed by fact. I can't persuade people if I don't have the
facts with me.
Right.
And as Daniel Patrick Moynihan said,
you're
entitled to your own opinion, you're not entitled
to your own facts.
Right.
And so that's different than a reporter who, say, works off the city desk and is assigned to go to a city council meeting. So I'm given enormous freedom of choice in pitching my ideas
to my editor.
And typically I pitch an idea to him early in the week with the deadline for the Sunday column of Wednesday, and he might choose one of, say, 2 or 3 that he likes best. Or I might pitch one that's just so outstanding that he'll say, sure, great idea, go ahead. So I've got tremendous freedom here, and this newspaper is great that way. Not every newspaper is that way.
A lot of newspapers are very editor-driven, and
there's a great deal of chains around what you can write, and invisible fences and things like that. I lost my column in Phoenix because
I called the real estate crash,
and I wrote about
uncomfortable
topics like water. And so they had enough of me, and they spent 7 years with the publisher sending off the demands
that I be fired or silenced.
And they finally gave up on me. And gee, I got to come to Seattle. You know, revenge is sweet. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, Lindsay, you type in the chat if that helped out or a bunch, and then I want to go on to another question because we've got questions coming in from our audience, which is great. Aaron Carlos Gonzalez, who's a student and a student of Miss 10, he's got a question. How hard is it to get into the field of journalism? And you know, and especially now, that what a relevant question because of how journalism continues to sort of morph and change. How hard is it, Jon, for somebody that wants to do that?
It's very hard. It's much harder than
when I started out because there are so many.
There are so fewer papers, and so I don't say that at all
to discourage you.
And I don't know if you're talking about broadcast journalism
or print journalism, but
all of these things have shrunk and shred. You know, lost employees. Tens of thousands have been lost. When I was at the Arizona Republic,
we had
a newsroom of
about 400 people. I think now there's about 130 people in that newsroom.
And so it goes. So if you can get in a good journalism program and get in an internship at a paper, that's one way in. Another way in is to start at smaller
papers and work
your way up, which is what I did. You know, never let anybody get in the way of your dream. I mean, eventually you have to be practical unless you're independently wealthy. But I'm not at all trying to discourage you. Just be aware that it is harder now than it once was. But if you work hard at it and you can get the right connections, such as
through internships,
then you can get your foot in the door. And there are unconventional journalism sites online like Vice News and Vox and others that have staff. The danger is being exploited as a gig worker now. But if that gets you some clips to freelance for
this or that publication, if they're
quality clips, then that can also help you get your foot in the door. But you don't want to make that your life. You want to be a full-time newsroom employee.
Awesome, Aaron. I hope that Aaron Carlos. I hope that gave you some insight into what your journey might look like. You know, in the currency of where journalism sits. I want to make sure that we, and I'm going to ask our producer, Ms. Gutierrez, can you put up for us the two books that Mr. Talton recommended? It was The Artist Way, and it was also, I'm forgetting the title of the one from Stephen King.
Yeah, it might be called just On Writing, but it's somewhere in one of my bookshelves. It's not nearby, but alas, it's there.
I think we're always looking, you know, at least in my role as artistic director, I'm always looking for things that, whether it be books or articles or whatever it is, references that can give us some insight and things that we can look for, you know, in terms of acquiring them to be a part of our own library at SCPA for students and available for students to read, or even to become part of the curriculum, depending upon if the teachers want to move in that direction. But The Artist's Way is one that I grew up knowing about as an actor, and a very important piece of writing and a very important book. And I think that it's wonderful now that we have another one that maybe our creative writers from Stephen King, I mean, who I think a lot of young people can relate to and love, that you can read about.
The third I would say is, since we're talking
books, is
Strunk and White's Elements of Style. Absolutely essential. Carry it around with you.
Well, you know what? You're going to make
avoid unnecessary words.
You're going to make Lindsay and you're going to make Susan Strasser, who is also our creative writing teacher, Susie. You're going to make them very, very happy by mentioning Strunk and White. I mean, I grew up at a college prep, and we had to have that book. That was one that we had to purchase for our English classes, and if we did not follow, that the constructs and the discipline of writing, as illuminated to us through Strunk and White, then we didn't do so well on our papers.
Here's the thing: is that nobody's ordering you to do anything, but it'll make you a better writer. And I remember in high school, teacher said to me, "You can't use that. That's a sentence fragment. It's not
a sentence."
Right.
And I said, "Well, Hemingway used
sentence fragments," and she said, "Well, you're not Hemingway."
Oh well,
and
yeah.
So but I mean, there was a real truth in that.
In that, I needed to learn the form first.
Sure.
And then I would know how to use a sentence
fragment
rarely but powerfully.
Right. Yeah. On Writing, a memoir of the craft by Stephen King. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And Andrea, thank you so much for pulling those up.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea.
Because those are great references. As a matter of fact, it's been a while since I read The Artist's Way. You just inspired me to maybe go pull it out of my library and reread it. Sometimes just to look at those things again.
There is a kind of an offshoot of that book that she wrote, and it's called The Right to Write. RIDHT to WRITE. And it's specifically for writers. Now, I'm still a fan of The Artist's Way, but you can also do Julia Cameron's The Right to Write.
Awesome.
But you got to do the exercises.
There you go. And that's the discipline. And I think that's one of the things that I think that you have really helped us, I think our audience understand, is that, all these things that we do in the arts, and especially when it comes to writing, which feels nebulous to a lot of folks, because as much as it's more touchable, right? It's more tangible. It seems elusive, because what does it mean then to be a writer, right? It just feels elusive. And so to hear that there has to be a discipline to your work ethic in order to be somebody who is going to be competitive and successful, I think is just a great reminder. Jon,
no matter what you do in your life, and you may do many things, the things you learn in the arts will be with you, and they'll give you an advantage, and they will enrich your life always, no matter what you do. If you go to Wall Street, you'll still be enriched by starting out in the arts. Don't go to Wall Street. We have plenty of investment bankers wrecking newspapers.
Hey, Jon, we're wrapping it up here. My gosh, I can't believe how fast the time has gone. We're near the end of our hour, and I feel like there's so many more things that I want to ask you, but we need to kind of bring it to a close. So I would love for you to share with us just some final thoughts for students. Students who are passionate about journalism, students who are passionate about creative writing, who may not know what next steps to take in trying to achieve that goal and those dreams. that elusiveness. Maybe just share with them some final thoughts that they can carry with them.
One thing I would say is don't feel under pressure to focus too soon. Try out a lot of different things. You love to play the guitar. You love to act in plays or work backstage. You love to write. You're not 45 yet. It'll be there sooner than you think. But give it some time. But then when you do focus, look for the role models and look for the disciplines like for writing that are contained in that Stephen King book that can help you. And don't let yourself off the hook, but also don't be such a perfectionist that you're sabotaging yourself all the time. Being a creative person is a hard gig because you can feel like the whole world's against you. Once I papered an entire wall, like I believe Fitzgerald did, with rejection letters from
Publishers.
and it was hard as heck to get published by a legitimate house. And I have a new novel coming out, still by a legitimate house. Somehow, even though I'm not a millionaire, I am still publishing books. So the last thing I'll leave you with is never give up. Never, never, never give up.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in tonight for this amazing interview with Jon Talton. Jon, I have admired you for years. I've looked up to you for years. I have followed you for years. And I was so tickled pink when you friended me on Facebook. I've admired your writing. I've admired your writing style and the complexity now that I understand of your wholeness, the wholeness of your life. It's inspirational.
So honored, Richard. Thank you. It's a great honor to
Hear that. Thank you very much.
And just thank you for being a guest for us and sharing us your artist journey tonight. For everybody that wants to see any of our episodes and to rewatch this episode, please go to sdscpamainstage.com. Click on the Salon Series. You can rewatch this episode in a few hours, and you can certainly see anything in our archive. Again, I want to thank the Friends of SCPA for underwriting and making this little series possible. And one final thank you to our amazing guest this evening, Mr. Jon Talton. Jon, just so honored that you were here. Thank you so much.
The pleasure and honor was mine.
Everybody enjoy your evening and enjoy your weekend. Good night.